Sound check. Check one, check two.
Hello, Emma.
Hi, Dan. Nice to see you.
And you, and thanks for coming on to the show. I have we. It would be too bold to say we know each other well because we don't. I've known of you for a long time, because you are a fellow Vegas gal, to myself. So we both come from the same city, the 2032 Olympics city. If 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 they can get their act together and build stadiums, etc.
Yeah, we'll see.
It is so good to have you come on to the show, and despite the fact that this is the first time that you have come on, I've had you in my mind to come on to the show for a little while now, and so I'm really tickled that you accepted the invitation.
Well, thank you for having me. It's nice. Nice to be here, and I have similarly known of you for quite some time, and have always enjoyed watching especially your special guests. And I'll be tuning in for Edry in, is it next week or in a couple of weeks?
It's in 2 weeks'
great.
time. Yeah, yeah, and
Awesome.
she is highly regarded, and so I'm really looking forward to having her come on. But today we've got you, and I want to kick off today's show because when you and I chatted about, well, what are we going to talk about and what have you, um, you went to the topic of vocal health, a shared passion of mine, and but I thought it would be really interesting to look at it through the lens of a vocologist, because that is a label that you apply to yourself quite appropriately is the word I was looking for. But I wonder whether you might unpack this word vocology for us, and then what it is to be a vocologist, and maybe in that process tell us how it is you came to be such.
Sure. Well, it's a big word, and it's a word that has been used to mean lots of different things. In its broadest sense, vocology, you can split it into voca means voice, and an ologist is someone who studies that thing. So really, it just means we study the voice. But more specifically, particularly where I got my training, which was through the SVI, the Summer Vocology Institute, which was put together initially by Dr. Dr. Ingo Tietze, who's a phenomenal voice scientist who we're very lucky to have in our field,
Mm,
and Dr. Kitty Verdolini Abbott and others. And so their more specific definition of a vocologist is sort of someone who deals with the science and the practice of voice habilitation. And so voice habilitation is another one of those big words that we need to unpack. But to habilitate something means to really optimize it and to get it to the peak state of function. So even though vocologists do rehabilitate voices, as a singing teacher, I only rehabilitate as part of a team. I don't do it on my own, but I would work with a laryngologist and a speech language pathologist when they're working on rehabilitating a voice. But more importantly, I think the habilitation is preventing voice injury and issues with the voice, and also just taking the voice from the state of being able to do everyday things like have a conversation with someone or complete your work, to being that kind of vocal athlete level that we are asking singers to be often, not only professional singers, but even singers who do it for fun are
yeah.
still really asking a lot of their instrument, you
Yes.
know?
I think the concept of rehabilitation slash habilitation is something that I've worked with here in my studio as well. And if I'm remembering correctly, Kitty and Inga co-authored a book. They may have done more than just one. I'm looking over at my bookshelf to see if I can readily see it, but yes, I can.
Yep.
It's up there.
The yellow and black one,
The yellow and
Vocology.
black one, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful text. It is everyone very much focused on singing teachers, but I first heard Kitty talk back in 2004 as a part of the AVA, a conference in Sydney. She was mind-blowing. She was just amazing even back then. So
yeah, I'm a fan.
Yes. I think you're a part of a big group of fans of Kitty Vernaliti. So what how do you think that approach not differentiates, as in, makes you better or worse or what have you, but how does that approach inform your approach as a singing teacher?
I think, look, I agree. It's no better or worse. It's just different, and it's a lens, as you said earlier, that you can look at voice through. And I think I've always been drawn to having an understanding of how things work and unpacking things. And so it really appeals to me to be able to listen to a singer and not only hear the aesthetics and the musicality of what they're doing, but dig a little bit deeper into what's going on under the hood, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think a well-trained vocologist should, as many singing teachers who are not vocologists also do, should be able to figure out what's going on anatomically and physiologically in a singer's voice and be able to help them then make adjustments to be able to do what they want to do based on that information. I think it's almost like you have this zoom out as well as a zoom in, that the vocology lens is about the meeting of the medical voice world with the aesthetic and performance-based voice world. But then you can also zoom into the nitty-gritty of the individual bits and pieces as well.
As someone who also works in team with a laryngologist and speech pathologist, I find that often the role I play is one of translator. We'll often have a session immediately after they've had their session with the laryngologist, and it's one of debrief and translation.
Totally.
And that's a really important role, but it's also it is in one sense the requirement on ones like yourself and myself is to have that. There is a level of knowledge, I guess, and experience. One can't get away from the art form of this in being able to not diagnose, and it's really important that we recognise we are not how would you say that word?
Diagnostician.
Thank you. That's what you did. That. See, there we go.
Big one.
That's a big one. It is not our role to diagnose, but it's certainly at times our role to perceive and perhaps query sounds and function, and particularly if we're the first port of call for a singer to be then directed on to a laryngologist. What do you think? I want to just ask, what do you think, and this is important as we sort of steer the conversation to, the vast majority of our viewers being singers, not singing teachers. What do you think the most common misunderstandings about vocal health and sustainability and efficiency, what do you think the biggest misconceptions are that you come across?
That's such a good question, and I think it's hard to narrow it down because I think by nature voice is an invisible instrument and you can't see it, so there's so many misconceptions based on the fact that singers don't really always know what's going on inside their voice. One of the really common ones that I come across is the idea of treating the voice like perhaps other muscles in the body, where I think in some, not all, but in some fitness circles and sporting circles, there's this idea of no pain, no gain, and that if you push through and power on, that things will get better. And that's unfortunately just not the case with the voice. It's not to say that you have to go to the other extreme either, and be very careful with your voice and walk on eggshells with it. But I think I see more commonly people who go, oh yeah, I lost my voice, but that's okay. That happened. I just, kept going. And sometimes you can get away with that, and some people more than others. But there is a limit to how much your voice will let you do that to it.
Yeah.
So having a little bit of an idea of pacing and gradually building up stamina and those sorts of things, I think is really important.
I think I wonder whether you could talk to this sort of other layer to it, and that is, I think that one of the challenges that I certainly experience, not only here in my studio but in my interactions online through the channel, is that often people are observing people who we might recognize as being exceptional. They're exceptions to the rule. I think there are far less exceptions to the rule than we'd like to think there are. But we recognize that there is a spectrum of biology, and some people's biology can do certain things that others can't, for a whole range of reasons. But how do you navigate that conversation with students, clients who might go, yeah, but listen to such and such. They've been doing it for 30 years and they're amazing. What do you, and when maybe we're recognizing a functional issue, how do you respond to that?
Oh, it's such a tricky one. And I think as singers, we tend to, we have dreams for ourselves and our voice, and we tend to put people up on a pedestal and go, oh, if only I could make those sounds that person can make. And I think the first step of that is away from anything technical or biological, and it's that mindset discussion of travel your own journey, figure out your own path, and figure out who you are as a singer in your own right, rather than following someone else's footsteps and wanting to travel their path, so to speak. So I think the mindset of just saying, actually, you are your own singer and you can figure out what is your voice and how you best communicate what you want to communicate.
Yeah.
And that's going to get you so much further than anything else. And then being willing to dedicate yourself to the process. And I think we've all singers have had that realization at some point where you go, actually, I sort of thought maybe this was going to be easier, because everyone can sing. And I firmly believe that everyone can sing, and probably everyone should sing more because it's so good for you in so many ways. But I think we can sometimes get stuck when we realize it's actually going to take a bit of time to build up a technique. So patience is the other key virtue, I think, in the process, is to say, I'm going to take this a step at a time, invest in my vocal technique development, whether that's through a teacher, a coach, or researching things and finding information for yourself, or a combination of those things, but actually just taking the time to build your voice.
Yeah. I want to come back to something that you said just a little bit earlier. You didn't use this word, but I heard this word as you were talking about the authentic self, the authentic voice. And I think a lot of people are in search of that sense of authentic voice. They want They want to be able to express themselves authentically. How do we, and another way I often discuss it with students, and here on the channel we talk about function and aesthetic, and looking for the management of both of those worlds in a well-managed, sustainable, efficient way. But I think underlying this desire for great aesthetic is the desire to express authentically. How do we manage both of those? Because sometimes they're pitted against each other, aren't they?
It feels like it sometimes, for sure. And I think you're right. I mean, I often have singer-songwriters come in because they're having a problem with their voice, and they go like, I don't want to change my voice. I just need to be able to keep doing it and not hurt myself. And I think that's when I would reassure them and say, look, technique and vocal function is not something that we do just for technique's sake. There's no technique police out there, hopefully, saying, have you ticked these boxes? Have you done these exercises? Because that's not what it's about. It's when you get stuck and you can't express what you want to express, that's where technique needs to level up to allow you to do that. So it has to serve that purpose first and foremost. And then I think it's about sometimes backing off or zooming out and saying, I want to express this feeling, but when I feel that feeling and I try to sing on it, maybe that doesn't work really well. Is there a way that I can give the audience the experience that I'm experiencing or that I want them to feel in a slightly more reproducible manner, in that I can do that show after show, or even just for a long practice session and not lose my voice.
Yeah. I have given the illustration before about technique is almost like a subterranean river. It's not something that we really even want to see, but it does give life to everything above it. And I, if your subterranean river goes dry, everything above it is likely to sort of shrivel and die as well. And so I think technique, whilst it can unfortunately come across, particularly I am thinking of myself here, where I'm talking about technique so often, it can come across as if that's all we're desirous of, and it isn't. It's about what the technique serves. Yeah,
exactly. It's what it gives you and the options. And I always think it's almost like an artist with a color palette, that if you've only got red and green, there's only so many things you can paint. And so why not give you all of those options so that when you want to, you can use them. But I know, and look, I've been in singing lessons myself before where I've gone on this path and the teacher is just taking me down a technique road that I have no context for, or I don't understand why they're trying to get me to do that. And I think that's a really good time as a student to say, hey, what's the goal here? Like, as your teacher, can you please explain what we're trying to achieve and how this technique is going to give me options in the future? And hopefully that, as I'm sure you do, that's what we try to do as singing teachers, is to give context for things and to ask the student, what is it that you feel like you want to do that you can't do yet? And how do we map out the pathway to being able to do that?
Yes. There should always be a reason for a technical activity.
Totally.
Or always. Otherwise, it's just filler. And no one has the time nor the money to have lessons that have no reason for being. I want to come back to maybe the we're talking earlier about habilitation, rehabilitation. I wonder if we can backtrack for a smidge and just talk about some of the because there are, in every singer's life and journey, there are times where the voice does experience some wear and tear. Not I don't I like this is before we would diagnose damage, right?
Yeah.
What are some helpful things that singers can do in that zone? Because I think that's not an uncommon experience for people who are regularly using their voice for singing. What are some things that you would recommend
Totally.
to singers?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a big question in some ways, because it's such a there's such a variety of ways you can get to that space,
Yes.
and to get out of it. I speak a lot to my students about, this might be a silly little metaphor, but it works for them, is like this green light, orange light, red light kind of situation. That green light means when you sing, your voice feels good, and sometimes when you sing, it gets better and better and better the longer you're singing.
Yes.
And that means keep going, and that's a wonderful thing. What you're talking about is kind of the orange light situation, which is where we go, maybe we need to slow down a little bit. So that's things like you find yourself fatiguing relatively quickly. Now, that duration is going to depend on so many things that it's hard to say an actual time frame for that, but certainly faster than it used to, or faster than it usually does, is a good indicator. Other little things like feeling muscle aches and discomfort on the outside of your voice. The needing to swallow a lot is a sort of sneaky sign that sometimes shows you there's a bit of excess tension going on. Sometimes needing to throat clear and things like that when you're singing. All of those signs to me would say you need to just slow down a little bit, and maybe pace your voice use a little bit would be the first solution, is to just say, how can I rearrange my singing schedule to do shorter periods of time, maybe more often, or just maybe shorter periods of time, and back off the schedule a little bit. The other thing is then looking at what other voice use do we have outside of our singing, because sometimes it's an issue with the singing, sometimes it's not. It's that you've taken on more shifts in your job working at a bar, and so your voice is already tired and fatigued before you even get to your singing practice.
Vocal pacing is such a important aspect of a singer's life, I think.
Totally.
And I often say that one of the most underrated tools that a singer has at their disposal for vocal health is actually vocal rest. There's so many bigger challenges that can be all but avoided by simply resting the voice, pulling into the pit stop. And can you talk a bit more to that concept of giving the voice downtime?
Yeah, look, I'm a huge fan of vocal naps. That's the concept that I always come back to, because I think I'll compare it to, say, spraining your ankle. And I think 20 years ago or so, if you sprained your ankle, they'd probably tell you to ice it and elevate it and not move it at all. Whereas now you sprain your ankle and they say, if it doesn't hurt too much, keep walking around gently on it and keep it moving. And the same goes for your voice, that in actual fact, complete rest, and certainly anything around the scope of like 24 hours or more of full vocal rest is very, very rarely actually necessary. But the pacing idea and introducing little vocal naps, where I always tell my singers, and I do this a lot myself, is set a timer on your phone for 20 minutes and no talking, no humming, no coughing, no throat clearing, just keep complete vocal silence. And that's often a really good amount to then refresh you enough to continue. If it's not enough, then that's a pretty good sign that your voice use is perhaps too intense. And so that 20-minute nap once, twice, maybe 3 times a day if you're using your voice intensively, if that doesn't actually solve the problem and doesn't feel like you're coming back to a better baseline each time, then maybe your intensive voice use is too intense, and that you can look at how to back off, whether that's a technique thing or often it's an amplification thing. If you're singing along to karaoke tracks at full volume with no microphone, that's something you could adjust to drop the intensity level of your voice use. Speaking or singing in the car, over the road noise, you're naturally going to be using a lot of intensity and probably a lot more effort than if the background noise was lower. So yeah, I think it's that combination of some vocal rest, enough that you're giving your voice time to reset and recover, and then looking at how to balance the actual voice use that you are doing.
I guess, listening to your explanation there about vocal naps, and it is important, as you said, and I'm so glad you did, to differentiate between complete rest and relative rest, and I think that's so important. To then listen to you then list out the what would seemingly be countless variables, in a individual's life that lead to how you, the singer, as an individual, need to manage and monitor and work with your voice. I wonder if we can take it a step further. So we're now, if we think about a singer who is needing to perform, but is, challenged. They're stepping in vocally tired. Let's just say that. They know they're not in they're in the what did you say, the amber, the yellow,
the orange light,
the orange light zone. How does that singer move forward proactively but safely?
Yeah, look, and this is where we spend so much time, I think, especially with singers who are working a lot, or singers who have a high voice use occupation outside of their singing. And I think there's a lot of things. The number one to start with is your warm-ups and cool down. I think when you're a little bit fatigued and coming in tired, as you say, the warm-up becomes so much more important, because you're really easing your voice in to the setup that you need for the performance or the gig. I've got my straw here. I'm a big fan of the SOVT thing. I really like wide straws, especially if there's some fatigue and tiredness going on, like bubble tea or smoothie straws. You can get silicone smoothie straws on Amazon for super cheap, or you can look at all the amazing offerings that other people have online and purchase yourself a fancy singing straw if you'd like to. But the wide straw in water will give you a really nice massage, get those vocal folds moving in a really low impact way. So that's a good start. The other thing is cool downs. And I think a lot of singers either don't know that a cool down is an option, or think it has to happen last thing before you go to sleep when you're done using your voice for the day. And so I often call them cool downs or resets, because you can use that throughout the day and in between sets or in between classes if you're a teacher or things like that, and actually use it as a reset. Sigh, draw bubble, vocal fry is a great little reset. I'll often on gigs while the guitarist is soloing just be doing a little fry, trying to look normal, but getting my little vocal reset in. So yeah, warm-ups, reset, and then trying to get your vocal hygiene or vocal health optimal as much as you can. So your hydration is super important. I love theme or nebulizer. There's some evidence starting to show that nebulizers, they're great, aren't they?
They are great.
It looks like nebulizers are probably better at hydrating our voice than what steam is, because they're able to actually penetrate the surface of the vocal folds. So if you're really struggling, certainly if you're on medications that affect the voice and are drying, the nebulizer is a great way to manage that, as well as staying on top of your water intake. Avoid your irritants. Stop vaping. Stop smoking.
Please stop vaping. Totally. I just, before we go to the question that's currently on screen, I just want to affirm the comment you diplomatically made around straws. I think you don't need to buy a fancy, apparently physically, physics designed, engineered straw. Literally, your drinking straw into water will do the job. And that's just, I'll get off my soapbox now. Let's go to the question at hand from They Still Call Me Ricky. Is there a balance you need to find between building stamina and vocal rest?
Yeah, great question. And yes, I think it is a constant balancing act between those two things. And it's all about, like Dan was saying before, that monitoring of your voice, of seeing where things are at. If your voice feels really good and when you sing, you continue to feel better and better the more you sing, then that's a really good sign that you've got more fuel left in the tank and you can keep going. And that's a good opportunity to build the stamina. But then you're going to have days where your voice fatigues quicker for a huge variety of reasons. And that's where pushing through is not helpful. So being able to read those signals in your own voice, like I said, the needing to swallow, needing to throat clear, certainly if singing keeps making you cough, that's a sign that something's not quite connecting in the system. So reading the signs for when your voice needs a rest, and then see how it goes. Maybe have a 20-minute vocal nap, come back in with something gentle like your straw, any of your SOVT exercises, and see how it's feeling there. A good checkpoint, I don't know if this is something you've probably already talked about on your channel, Dan, but swell checks or swelling monitoring as singers. It's something that sounds very medical and a little bit boring perhaps, but I find it really, really helpful to check in. The idea of a swell check is that you do it first thing in the morning before you've warmed your voice up, because that's going to give you a bit more information. And it's essentially anything where you're making a sound that is light and a little bit breathy and low volume right at the top of your range. And it's going to give you a really clear indicator of what situation is going on in your vocal folds, what condition they're in. So one of the suggested swell checks is to sing Happy Birthday really, really high and really soft. So that's a fun one. I like a little triad, like a little 1 3 5 3 1, but about an octave higher than that. And just doing like a he kind of sound can be fun to play with. And what you'll notice is if your voice is in really great condition, the soft high sounds come out quite cleanly. Whereas if you've got some swelling going on, you start to make that sound and it's like you have a big gap between the H and the E.
Yeah.
Or in Happy Birthday, the H and the appy.
Yes.
And when you have that, we call it a delayed onset. When you have that gap, then that's a sign that your vocal folds are a bit puffy, a bit swollen, and maybe it's time to back off. And that day, don't do so much practice.
No, and I think I'm trying to remember whether it was Marcy Rosenberg or Wendy LeBorn who came on and did a session about exactly what you just outlined. Yeah, so it's good to be reminded of those vocal checks. Deanne Stern has asked, how do you manage your voice after being sick? What is the best way to recover? Is it safe to sing while sick? Great question, Deanne.
Great question. Hi, Deanne. I'm actually sick at the moment, so timely question. I've got a little bit of a flu brewing.
You're being a true champion.
Thank you. The show must go on, right?
It is going on.
What I was just talking about, the swell checks, is probably a really good indicator of that. And if you ideally you get in the habit of doing that quite regularly, so you know what your highest comfortable pitch is when your voice is in tip-top condition, so that when you've lost a good semitone 2 3 4, you start to go, oh, I need to take it easy. I think generally, unless pretty much the only condition where we would say you need to completely rest your voice 100% is if you suspect you've had a vocal hemorrhage, and that's something that can only be diagnosed by a laryngologist. And it's relatively rare, so I don't think you should be assuming that every time you get sick and get husky that's what's happened, because it's quite unlikely. But that would be the only situation where I would say just shut up completely for at least 24 hours, if
Yes.
not more.
Yeah.
But generally, when you're sick, you're dealing with inflammation and your vocal folds are a bit swollen, or a lot swollen, depending on how severe it is.
Yeah.
So things, again, the wide straw in water, if you can get yourself, walk past a bubble tea shop and grab a bubble tea straw or those smoothie straws that you can purchase, and get that in water and get the bubbles, because essentially, in simple terms, the bubbling of the water gives your vocal folds a little massage
Yes.
and really gives it that therapeutic kind of effect.
Yes.
And what you might find is, especially if it's more of a head cold and it's congestion, once you get on the straw and maybe getting some breath flow happening, your voice actually might feel pretty good, and you can get away with a little bit of practice without feeling at all like you're pushing it. But as soon as you start to feel those signs of, certainly if it hurts, shut up, and if it's feeling really effortful, back off.
We mentioned Kitty Verdolini earlier in the show, and it was actually at that Sydney conference that I was mentioning that she brought what were her initial findings of some research that she was doing. Remembering this was over 20 years ago, into the impact. They were looking at this at a molecular cellular level. The impact of vocal fold movement in helping to disperse the retained fluid within the vocal folds, which then helps to, reduce the swelling. Now that was a sort of revolutionary thought back then, but I think we now know that when we're able to Kitty was proven right. Essentially, her hypothesis was, we know that fluid retention can be moved on with, and it is important for us to know, with appropriate balanced phonatory patterns, and straw phonation is so helpful with that. Karen from Singwise has asked, what do you suggest for chronic posterior swelling due to LPR? LPR, everyone, is laryngeal pharyngeal reflux. What would you suggest?
Good question. And it's such a battle, the LPR journey, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So look, I think any swelling is swelling as far as your vocal folds are concerned. So similarly, being aware of your voice, doing those swell checks maybe on a daily basis so you can monitor how it's going. But I think the key for that is to try to manage the LPR as best you can, which is really tricky. I'm a big fan of making lots of lifestyle changes as much as you can to try to battle it. I'm definitely not anti-medications, because I think there's absolutely a time and a place where medications are going to be really helpful. But the medications alone aren't going to solve the problem, because all they do is really decrease the acid levels in your stomach. You still may be refluxing digestive enzymes, which then if you eat or drink something, particularly something acidic, you're going to get that acid formation up in your larynx and pharynx area anyway. So I think trying to manage your lifestyle, figure out your triggers. It's tomato for me. It's like I cannot even eat a single cherry tomato. I've got the worst reflux, but a little bit of chili is okay, and citrus seems to be okay.
No, none of the above for me. Even just your normal carbonated, just straight carbonated water will evoke some response from me. So it's recognizing what your triggers are, isn't it? And learning to manage your diet accordingly. We've talked about here on the show, we've talked many times about and I know Karen herself is a singing teacher, and so she's put in that question, I think, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure Karen knows the answers to these. But I advocate, and I've talked with a couple of gastroenterologists about this, the use of Gaviscon as a preemptive strike is a helpful thing to do. Not habitually. If you're having to do it all the time, there you probably need to see your doctor. But as a preventative, immediately before you go to bed, it's a big help. we're nearly,
Definitely.
believe it or not, we are coming to the end of the road of our time today. So what we're going to do, I want to finish off by closing down. I'm about to end the poll, everyone. So we got to 21. I like to get to 21 votes, Emma.
Nice.
I always say
Good amount.
21's not a number, it's a legend. So here we go. We're going to end the poll. We got to 21 votes. We're ending the poll. Let's have a look at the results. Interesting to see. So what we've got here, we've got managing, so that what's your biggest vocal health challenge? Managing stress and tension, just pipped warm-ups, and then staying hydrated every day, and avoiding vocal overuse. I must admit, I thought warm-ups would come in at the top. But
it's close.
Good to see people, and in one sense, connected to self about stress and tension. What are your reflections on those results?
That's so interesting and surprising at first, but I think you're right that people are maybe getting more and more in tune with those things like stress levels and tension, and it's so important to manage, isn't it? I've had a almost lifelong battle with meditation because I just hate being bad at it, and I find it really hard, but I keep going, and I think it's something that can be so impactful as a singer, certainly as a performer, being able to practice mindfulness in some way. It doesn't have to be in the best and most prolific ways, and moving your body as well, because we know that moving your body is helpful for your stress levels and for your mental health, and that mobility and flexibility is something that is just so important as a singer. So things like stretching, moving around, getting a little bit of exercise in, all those sorts of things.
The most helpful word for me in my meditational life is the word practice. That I practice meditation, that it will, because I too, like you, there are certain forms of meditation that I prefer to others. Like I really enjoy the breath flow approach. How do you go with the body check where you do tense a certain part, and how do you go with that?
I love them, actually.
Do you like that? Oh,
yeah, because it's like it gives your brain something to do, because that's my hardest thing, is I'm off thinking about the to-do list and all the other things that need to be thought about. So that intense focus that keeps changing is a great way for me to stay focused, I guess.
It is an important thing, and I think, as the years go on, we are, I think, becoming more comfortable with this idea that meditation can play such an important role, not only in our everyday lives, but in our singing. It's, to be able to manage your stress and your tension are important. We have done our time, and I said to you before the show started that
time flies, doesn't it?
It goes very quickly. I want to say thank you to everyone for their questions. There were some really great questions today that we were able to throw into the chat, into the show, which is great. Do you have any closing thoughts or comments that you want to leave us with?
I mean, thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun. I think for all of the singers out there, just keep trusting the process and observe, monitor your voice, and don't be afraid to try things out and to commit to the journey, because it's lots of fun.
Lots of fun. Thank you so much for being on today's show, Emma.